Well, it's all happening. We're in a full-blown dystopian sci-fi novel now.
It's scary stuff, isn't it? Who needs to go to the movies?
No. It's bizarre. It's beyond. It's really beyond anything any sci-fi writer could have imagined, I think, in terms of certain aspects of it. Anyway, the political aspect is always predictable.
The political and this whole pandemic, which I'm now calling COVID Gate. But we've been watching it coming, and it's been a bit like this, for my mind, a bit like a chess game that you can see and you go, surely they're not going to move that one next, surely not. But every time they do, one after another, you go, no, this cannot be the next move. Sure enough it is.
Yeah, well, it was phenomenal. I just could not believe that Denmark and New Zealand would be two of the first to enact such legislation. It's astonishing.
Denmark, New Zealand and England with their COVID law, the countries that you would have thought would have had quite strong human rights histories, and we would have thought the communities would have been quite aware. Maybe we're a bit obedient in New Zealand, but surely we've got a long history of human rights and standing up for nuclear free and different things, but I think we're perhaps out of practice.
Yep, definitely out of practice. It is a new generation. I mean, it's there's something quite different in how people perhaps put things together now than they did during even the last major thing would have been the anti-GE movement. It seems to be quite a different atmosphere and quite a different way people look at things or synthesize things or connect the dots.
Interesting, the older people get it straight away. I was visiting my parents the other day and they straight away said, look, what are all these changes? It's like what happened in Hitler's Germany. And you talk to younger people and they, oh, what's the problem? Jacinda's lovely. She, it's all fine. She's smiling. She's telling us to be kind and compassionate, and they can't see beyond the immediate what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real liability to have someone as personable as Jacinda or Barack Obama. And most times they cannot recruit frontline people of that caliber. I think we really should have a New World Order Academy Award. And,
well, I think they went to media training school, didn't they? Isn't that what experience that they had to get to where they are?
Sure. I mean, you can train people only so far. They have to actually have that charisma as well, and the intelligence as well. And America was poised for a revolt until they, replaced George W. with Obama. And New Zealand wasn't quite in that situation, although it should have been with John Key. But anyway, it's and the people that put these people in power need awards as casting directors as well.
Yeah, it is. It's like a bad movie, isn't it? And you can see all the different roles. You can see, and I've been looking for years trying to work out who the puppeteers are who are actually pulling the strings behind all of these people, because they're the ones that you never actually see, but you know that they're there.
Yeah. And what's crazy about this is, in our lifetime we saw, the last ambitious project like this was Hitler, because he at least wanted to take over all of Europe. But I don't know if certainly never before in history has anyone attempted a global takeover of this ambitious magnitude.
No, although a lot of Maori have been coming to me and saying, look, it's just like colonisation all over again. We thought that we'd work through this in the 1870s, 1880s, and here they are again, passing laws and exercising these claimed rights that they can just come into our marae, come into our homes and do what they like. Yeah. What has changed? Why can this still happen again?
And one of the tactics in all of this was, there were decades of planning, but one of the tactics is shock and awe. that they are working so fast and people just can't believe that just happened.
And so outrageous. If they just tried to do a small step that we could get our heads around, we'd say, well, hang on, that's a bit odd. Why are they doing that? But when they do an outrageous step, people are just sort of stunned and say, no, there must be more to this, and it can't be right.
Exactly. Yeah.
I found it with even last week. So a week ago, we did our walk, chalk and talk in Nelson the first time, and the main concerns then was the vaccines and 5G and some of the other issues. Nobody wrote as their line that the police could come into their home as of right. Nobody wrote as their line that the police could enter a marae as of right. And then a few days later, I found the Parliament's list of legislation that they were proposing to pass that week, including this COVID Amendment Health Bill, whatever it was called. And I posted that up on Tuesday. And I got a lot of abuse on Tuesday for suggesting that these laws were going to be passed through Parliament that week, even though they came from the parliamentary website. People said, look, it's not possible that our Parliament would change such significant laws so quickly. And I basically said, watch this space.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Tuesday, all sorts of debates. I think the first and second reading. Wednesday, they passed the law. They went through the whole parliamentary process. They removed all of the public consultation steps that we normally have, the select committee inquiries. They passed the law. And for the second time in a couple of weeks, they actually passed the wrong law and they voted the wrong way. And so this is how callous and how random and misconceived, and Parliament is supposed to be supreme. It breaks my heart as a lawyer with an interest in constitutional matters that it has come to this, that all of that history is just overlooked, and we don't care anymore because we want to do this.
Yeah. And there's 5 or 6 people sitting there during these proceedings.
Yeah.
It's a
almost empty Parliament. Hardly anybody even turns up of the parliamentary MPs that we pay to look after our rights and to represent us. Hardly any of them even turn up in the hall. Yeah, exactly. 2 or 3, 4, 5 of them sitting there.
Yeah, it's astounding, really. And there's no excuse for this. I mean, this has torn down centuries of fighting for the most basic rights of search and seizure and rights of assembly, free speech. It is there is no excuse ever for this kind of legislation, because these are principles. You don't throw principles by definition are not compromisable. They don't vary with the situation.
And they're not principles if they do vary with the situation. If you don't have a fundamental bottom line of what is it to be a human being, if we don't have rights over what happens in our homes, what happens in our religious places, in our maraes, what happens to our bodies, what are we? What do they think we are? The people that are representing us. This is what I ask myself. What do they think we are? Just a kind of unit of currency that they can play games with? Are we a sort of a toy?
Yeah, they obviously feel they're in a different echelon than the people they represent. Now, these people think that they're going to be safe. Well, I have news for them. They're no safer than the ancient Roman senators were under Nero and Caligula, because in the end, their turn will come. They will be as expendable as anybody else that they think is in the level below them.
Well, we learn from the example of our leaders, and if our leaders treat the people like that, they can only expect that the people will respond like that to the leaders. That's the way I see it. It's all role modelling. And you've got to role model how you want things to be. You can't role model, oh, this is just a temporary thing to justify this or to justify that. You've got to role model the big picture of how we really want the world to be.
Exactly. If New Zealanders believe everything about this pandemic and they want to take measures to help the situation, that's up to them. But to legislate away the rights and freedoms that, as we say, are not to be compromised, because you can always find an excuse to change things that are fundamental. And when they start talking about mandatory vaccines, you know that once you have forced medical procedures of any kind, then anything goes in any other area as well.
Well, the right to your own body has always been fundamental with medicine. You can refuse blood, you can refuse operations, you can die if you want to. That's your choice. And for religious grounds or just your own freedoms, you can refuse people contacting your body. You've got a right to say no. And we've been really working hard to get people empowered to say no, to stand up to domestic violence and to stand up to all these other intrusions on their body. And now we have the state going down this path of saying, well, actually, we can choose for you. We know better than you. We don't actually even have all the information, and we're certainly not going to give the information to you, but trust us.
Yep.
Trust us. We know what we're doing. Sorry, it doesn't work for me.
No, and besides the whole issue around the vaccination and the testing being ludicrous, which we can get into, it's the fact that they want to actually, the arrogance. No, that's the point. The arrogance of saying that our medical paradigm, what I believe in terms of what constitutes health, and how you maintain or regain health, is the only way, when everybody knows there are many, many ways. It is an appalling arrogance to impose your paradigm of health on other people.
It is appalling arrogance, and it is so contrary. If they try and claim the scientific justification to it, they fail on that too. We all know food is thy medicine. We've got cultures all around the world that have got thousands of years of using natural plants and natural methods of looking after their health and managing all of these so-called diseases. And yet, which country in the world has got the worst outcome from COVID? It's the most medicalised country, the USA. The vaccines, the intrusions, the ventilators, all of the things that anyone with half any common sense and who does any research at all can see is not going to work. For some reason, their medical system goes down that path and further down that path and keeps getting really bad outcomes.
Yeah, you follow the money. It's all about money now, and talk about principles. It's the most basic principle that if you act outside of nature and natural laws, the outcome is not going to be good. And any epidemiologist worth their salt knows that the primary factors, even in an infectious disease, are nutrition and sanitation in terms of who succumbs.
And stress, just a sense of well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, feeling safe, feeling secure. If you're stressed and you're worried and you've been panicked, you're likely to get a worse outcome than if you're relaxed and calm. It's just fundamental stuff.
And we've been under assault now with unnatural factors in our environment for so long. I mean, everyone knows about the chemical pollution, of course, but it turns out that the electromagnetic pollution has been just as devastating for people's health all along, and it's a factor that was never talked about until recently.
It's a factor they've known about when they brought in radio waves, when they brought in x-rays, when they brought in electricity into homes. Every time there's been a glitch in the standard of human health and the illness. And then with 3G, 4G, and now we're coming up to 5G, every single time it's another burden on our body. It's hardly surprising that it interferes with us because we are electromagnetic beings. If you don't know anything about it, if you haven't done any reading at all, but you know that electromagnetic radiation affects the way your body operates. It affects the interactions, it affects the way your brain works, it affects the way your cells work, it affects the way your cell membranes work, it affects the way your hormones work, it affects the way everything works.
Absolutely. The biochemistry, the chemistry of biology only works in conjunction. I mean, all of these materials move in your body according to electromagnetic principles, and it's almost a more fundamental disruption of your metabolism and than chemical pollution.
Well, it is, and it is. I think the combination is even worse again, because the electromagnetic radiation changes the leakiness of your cell membrane. So your blood-brain barrier and all of the membranes in your body of your skin, what leaks into your skin. And then if you're in an environment with contamination, with chemical contamination, the chemicals are then getting into your body. And so that's like a multiplier effect.
Yeah, and heavy metals, of course, act as a total correlation with electromagnetic fields. So the more heavy metals you have in your body, the stronger the effect you're getting from
the multiplier
EMFs.
effect. One of the problems in Arua with the radio tower there, the horses with metal shoes were getting burnt hooves. So the radiation coming from the radio tower, and I guess it's the dirty electricity and all sorts of other effects, nobody ever really figured it out completely, but any kind of metal was creating a multiplier effect. Burnt hooves, burns where the halters were. The people who lived nearby were getting burns where they had metal glasses over their noses, burns where their teeth were on the outside of their skin, burns where their underwire bra went. They know that. It's all really well documented, but the New Zealand Standard doesn't even consider that at all.
No, it's, all the fillings in the mouth, anyone has braces, and compounded by the aluminium and barium falling from the skies regularly with the spraying, our bodies are being filled. We're becoming antennas.
Yeah, we are. And Martin Gledhill, who used to do the monitoring for the government and for the telcos and for the power companies and for pretty much anyone else who paid him enough, he actually reported very high levels of radiation one time, again in Arua. And then he said, oh no, my body was acting as an antenna and I was getting a false high reading. And I said... His body. And I said, hang on a minute, are you saying that people's bodies can act as an antenna and it adds to the reading? Isn't that extremely concerning? It just blew me away that could just be dismissed as a sort of a peripheral nuisance factor. If our bodies are antenna and we're attracting even higher levels, it's a more serious effect again than what's being monitored for.
A $10,000, $100,000 instrument is a joke compared to the sensitive instrument that is the human body.
Yeah, it's really, I've been talking around the country on 5G and radiation probably since about October, November last year. I think I've talked about over 20 different towns, and people have been... the opening of my talk is always, if you think you know nothing about 5G, you're not alone, because neither do the companies that are rolling out 5G and neither do your elected representatives. Nobody knows much about 5G because they're developing it as they go along. They've never tested it.
Well, the military knows all about those frequencies, not the general public or even general industry people.
Actually, you're right, Joe, and there's been a lot of more information that's come out that was hidden in the 60s and 70s, the military information starting to trickle out through the system, and all of that information is indicating harm from microwave radiation.
Yeah, well, they deal in weapons. Why did they do this study? Because they're interested in it as a weapon, and they know all about, especially radio waves or microwaves. They know very well how it can be used to destroy human health and life. It's all there, and there's several declassified ones out now. But to get back to COVID, I think that so starting with the test, many of viewers will have heard that the test itself is ridiculous. The inventor of the polymerase chain reaction test said it must never be used as a diagnostic tool for infectious diseases. The biggest joke is that they claim they can test and develop a vaccine for a virus they have never purified and isolated in the first place. They are creating something much ado about nothing because they don't even have something on which to base anything further.
And my understanding with this PCR test, if they had a contaminant in the first place and they've basically multiplied the contaminant of multiple replications, they've got a very multiplied contaminant, which could be absolutely anything we've seen.
Any coronavirus, the common cold, any past flu.
The exosomes coming out of the human body, human cells that we've seen other videos of, could be absolutely anything. So we're just getting a very sensitized test of testing for something.
Yeah, and it's perfect because it's a perfect way to magnify and pump up the numbers. So I don't know how verifiable it was, but certainly the thing is out there. I don't know if the Tanzanian government did this or who did it in Tanzania, but they tested a pawpaw and a goat and other things, and they tested positive
under the COVID test. I know, and it looks like people who have had flu vaccines are testing positive under the COVID test. Not always, but sometimes. And so, isn't it interesting? The government has been telling people over 65 years old to get flu vaccine, and the population most at risk from COVID are people over 65. So isn't it just possible that the people that are testing positive for COVID are because they've had a flu vaccine?
Of course.
And then the second problem is we know, and there's a lot of published research about this, if you've had a flu vaccine, you are more susceptible to other respiratory illnesses. So I do not understand, and I've said it to many of my friends, why would anybody get a flu vaccine this year when we've been told that COVID is highly dangerous and dangerous enough to stop the world? Why would we get a flu vaccine this year? Our borders are closed. Nobody can come in from overseas with any of the flus anyway, and yet people are being forced or encouraged strongly to get a flu vaccine when the flu vaccine itself says, do not have this if you're susceptible to other respiratory illnesses.
Yes, yeah. And once again, you take elderly people, they've had a lifetime of exposure to unnatural things and chemicals and heavy metals, and their bodies are probably pretty overloaded as it is. Their systems are not, in the peak of their youth anymore. And to add on another insult is virtually guaranteeing a tipping point.
Yeah, and you look at the ingredients. I mean, I hadn't looked at the ingredients in vaccines until recently. I studied microbiology, and we were told, great new way of doing things. You're priming the body for this disease that might come along later, and you protect yourself. And over the years, we've learned that the vaccines are not all that they're hyped up to be at all, and you've got to keep having more vaccines and topping up your system and all that. But then the other side of it is you look at the ingredients in the vaccine, horrible ingredients, bovine ingredients and fetal ingredients, mouse viruses, heavy metals. What I hadn't learned until I met Del Bigtree and listened to his talk is the active ingredient, what they're trying to protect you against, doesn't even work unless they put what they call the adjuvant in with the virus. So the adjuvant is the mercury or whatever the
irritants, basically.
And that exaggerates the effect of whatever they inject into you to try and make your body have an immune reaction that they then hope will protect you in future. So they can't do it without putting toxins into your body.
No, it's a financial thing as well, because there's a doctor in New Zealand who has a big property in the North Island. I forget his name. He was involved in promoting genetic engineering as well. I can't remember what his name is, but he has a huge farm on which he has all these animals, which are basically serum factories. He's using them as serum for vaccines. Wow. So I'm sure he charges a lot of money for this abomination. So the less of that the pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers use, it's cheaper for them, and put in more irritants instead to irritate the body into producing a reaction. So the mercury, the squalene, the aluminium, the God knows what else. I mean, there's so much in there. It's MSG at times. I mean, there's so much rubbish in there. It is both biological and chemical filth, aborted fetal cells, just the plethora of unknown viruses from the stuff that they grow this on.
All the biological contamination factors and the chemical contamination. Yet I've been to the doctors and they've offered vaccines. They've offered viruses with the vaccines.
That's a little Freudian slip, it's very accurate.
But has your doctor ever told you what the ingredients are in the vaccine that they're offering you? I have never had a doctor who said, look, I'm offering you to have this vaccine and, it contains A, B, C, D, E, F. It contains all of these ingredients. Never ever heard of it.
No, they don't read the inserts themselves half the time, I'm sure.
Well, and that's one of the things I'm really concerned about, this informed consent, because how can you be consenting to have a vaccine if you don't know what is in the vaccine that they're offering to you?
The blind leading the blind.
And how can a doctor fulfill their medical obligations under the Health and Disability Act and the Hippocratic oath that they've given if they don't know what's in the vaccine that they're offering their patients?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Another Freudian slip, Hippocratic oath.
Yeah, Hippocratic oath. Hippocratic oath. Yeah, I mean, it's when you start peeling back, it's like a rotten onion. You peel back layer after layer after layer of rotten onion, and you keep finding another layer and another layer, and you peel through that and you peel through that. But what is the core? What is the truth under all of this? And how many assumptions can we make? How much unreliable data can we use before we actually say, look, actually this way of doing it is not helping our health and well-being?
No, but it's a great business model. Like there's a couple of agendas going on, and the darker agenda we can talk about as well. But the obvious one is follow the money. If you can create a fear-based explosion around something, whether it's imaginary or real, and if you can. And let's be real. I mean, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, there were guys carting bodies, just picking bodies up off the street and carting them down the street. That's a plague.
Yeah. Nothing like what we've had.
And they have pumped up the fear around whatever this is globally. Now, if they can sell billions and billions of vaccines. Now we think about the bonanza, financial bonanza around that. It is so obvious who and why this would be pushed. And no legal liability in the
vaccines
in the US certainly.
Well, no legal liability in New Zealand because of ACC laws, so you can't sue for personal injury, so much the same.
Right, they have no incentive to even make them safe if they even wanted to. There's no incentive whatsoever, and it's just a total bonanza. And there's the push, there's the propaganda about making it mandatory. If it was so great, they wouldn't have to push for making it mandatory.
Yeah, we'd all be queuing to get it because we'd want it. But yeah, why? And this kind of shaming people that ask questions, I find that really outrageous as well. We should all be encouraged to ask questions. And if they've got legitimate answers, why are they afraid of people asking questions? They should have their answers lined up ready there for us to see in the research. Where's the research showing it's safe? Great case in America that Robert Kennedy did, asking for the data that shows the vaccines are safe. And they kept asking. In the end, they went to court and they asked. And in the end, it came back through the court that there is no data, there has been no testing.
No. I mean, the testing would be suicide for them to carry out a proper test against a control group that was totally unvaccinated or had never had vaccines in their life, for example.
But the testing that they do is comparing the new vaccine with the previous vaccine.
Yeah, we just tweak this and let's see if it's how much worse it is. There's no
obvious harmful difference between last year's vaccine and this year's. You guys are safe.
Yeah. It's ludicrous. And now we've got the issue of this whole propaganda of people rebelling against increased antennas on cell towers. Right now they're supposedly not putting out millimeter waves yet, but people rebelling against 5G and what that might mean, and them totally controlling the narrative and claiming ridiculously that these people are conspiracy theorists saying that EMFs and 5G are creating COVID or making it worse. No, they're just totally editorializing. It is ridiculous. What the doctors who have spoken out have said that a particular gigahertz frequency of 60 gigahertz in particular interferes with the heme of hemoglobin absorbing and utilizing oxygen. And that's why people look like they're dying of a respiratory disease, which COVID can be easily used as a cover story for those deaths, which have nothing to do with COVID. And the doctors are saying these patients are not dying of pneumonia. Their lungs are not filling with fluid. They look like somebody who's at the top of Mount Everest without oxygen.
Yeah, and in England, some of the doctors there trialled using oxygen, giving them supplementary oxygen, and those patients recovered and went home because they're low in oxygen, whereas where they've used ventilators, it seems to just make the problem worse, because the problem is not a physical lung problem. The problem is that the chemical problem, that the heme and the hemoglobin is not working properly and not attaching the oxygen properly.
Right,
Yeah.
and that seems, and the 60 gigahertz seems so far to be the preferred frequency that was used in Wuhan, in northern Italy, and New York, the places that were most heavily hit with lethality of supposedly COVID. It is a perfect cover story.
Yeah, and there's a huge correlation between the places where they've had that phase of 5G rollout and the worst COVID records, the most harm. So what testing is done on 5G, are they asking people to come to hospital? Have you been exposed to a 5G radiation tower? Is there one near your home? Is there one near your workplace? Have you got it in your home? What field are you working in? We don't know, because nobody's asking that data. But what the studies that have been done, there was one that I've seen in America, and there's another one now in Europe. There's a huge correlation between the places with the most of those 5G towers and the most reported cases of COVID.
Yeah, you can overlap the maps.
Almost identical, the way they overlap.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to say that it is the only cause, and it's not to say there's not some viruses going around, but what it should be doing is, we had Professor Lazinski here last year, and a lot of the world experts, we need to be more precautionary on 5G. We should not be rolling out new forms of radiation in our communities without first being sure that it's safe, or at least that it's not causing us harm.
On the contrary, not only should we not be rolling out more of anything, we need a major investigation into the health effects of everything in society that we were born into so far.
Exactly. And let's, rather than have more, let's have less. I mean, we've got this complaint in Parliament, in the Regulations Review Committee, about the New Zealand standard, so outdated, 1999 standard that protects only against the heating effects and not against the biological effects of radiation, and also against the NES, that's the National Environment Standard for Telecommunications Facilities, which allows all these new radio frequency radiations and new cell towers to be rolled out pretty much anywhere in the community without any public consultation. So I filed that for the New Zealand Outdoors Party on I think the 20th of January or late January this year. And I cross-referenced all of the petitions that I was aware of, that from communities all around New Zealand who didn't want 5G, at least not without consultation and without being sure that it was safe for them. So that's been in the system, representing tens of thousands of New Zealanders since January. And we pushed it through the system. It was penciled in for a hearing on the 29th of April in Parliament's Regulations Review Committee in Wellington. Got a letter to say, oh, no, because of COVID, the lockdown, this is going to be postponed. We're not doing any of these hearings, at least until level 2. So, hey, it's level 2 now. Parliament starts again, I think, the 3rd of June. I'm going to be ready in Wellington, expecting this hearing that gets underway again urgently so that we can hear this. But the problem that's been happening in the meantime, there was going to be an auction of these different radio frequencies, but guess what happened during COVID? Guess what happened? Government decided that they wouldn't auction these valuable property rights, and including rights that they're promised to Maori. I have a bit of a dispute about some of the claims that the Maori made, that whether it was beneficial for them or not, but anyway, they were going to auction the rights to Telecom, Vodafone, whatever, and there would be a process with that. But because of COVID, the government's decided they don't need to auction the rights, they can give them away instead.
How magnanimous.
Give them away to the telcos and get them all up and running much faster so that we can have yet more radiation.
So we can have a second wave.
A second wave. And even if you don't have any concern about radiation, I think most people do now, the more they hear about it, but even if you don't, while the community is so interested in its health, and while we've seen just how health can change our whole lifestyle so much, wouldn't you have thought that somebody in Wellington, somebody who's responsible for our health and well-being and for our livelihoods, would have said, hang on a minute, with all this concern about health, shouldn't we be acting consistently with all these other harms and treat them all the same way and be precautionary with more radiation rollout, just as we're being precautionary with viruses? There's so many red flags.
Yes. And why is this all possible? Now, we can point to many perpetrators here, but why are people in government allowed to get away with this? Because of our corporate mass media that is supposed to be the watchdog to prevent government overstepping their bounds and to prevent all kinds of things. Instead, they have become the attack dog of the money interests. It's appalling. In the list of criminality that has enabled everything we're seeing, they are very close to the top of the major criminals enabling all of the abomination we're witnessing right now. Yeah. The way what they call, there are no journalists left. All of the journalists, the real journalists, have had to go to the internet. No one could remain in that milieu.
Yeah, there's no analysis. It's all just so
propaganda,
superficial.
Straight propaganda.
Just straight propaganda, no attempt. And so many times you see a story with a headline and you read the story, it doesn't even match the headline. The headline says what the story wants to be, and somebody's made a comment about something, but anything that doesn't fit the headline is just kind of written in fine print somewhere and just not acknowledged. It's just unbelievable how it all is allowed to carry on.
They're just corporations bought and paid for by other corporations who are their sponsors. Big Pharma, petrochemical, the likes of Bayer, Monsanto, the worst abominations that our society, our civilization has produced to this point are who brings you the news.
Yeah, and it's all linked in. I mean, it's been a very effective strategy for them because Big Pharma got into the medical schools and trained the doctors up to think with their focus on pharmaceutical products rather than natural health.
The petroleum families originally,
So and then the science is bought science. So we don't have independent quality science. We have public-private science, where the private choose the public basically supplement the funding for the private science to be done. I've had a real problem with this for years. And now and the same with the universities, because they're getting massive donations from different corporations. They can't have other people in the university standing up for free speech that might be contrary to the interests of those corporations who are funding the university or funding the medical school or whatever. So all of the professors who have got information that's really important for us to learn are quietened down. They're not allowed to say that. So they either become obedient and silent, or they leave, or they lose their funding and they have no choice but to leave. We've seen it, Ollie Johansson and a lot of the experts on radio frequency radiation. They have no funding. So you either have to follow the party line and get your funding and keep going, or natural selection, you starve to death because you have no funding, because you've actually got the public interest message at heart.
Same process happened in Nazi Germany. The last bastion were the few decent judges left, and eventually they had to leave as well. And all of a sudden everything was possible.
The bright hope out of all this, because I find it really depressing when you look at what our system is doing and how our system is failing us. It's not fit for purpose. There's no part of our system that's fit for purpose of promoting public well-being.
No.
It fails through the legislature, out the MPs that we elect. It fails through the bureaucrats. It fails through the judiciary because they don't have the expertise. It fails through the science because paid science dominates. It fails at every level. The only hope that I can see we have left are the people getting aware enough and saying, hey, this, we've had enough.
Every institution in our society, in society at this point in time, is utterly corrupt. Not only does it fail us, it's intentional.
You're deliberate failing.
We're dealing with a series of cartels, criminal cartels of organized crime that make a drug cartel look like choir boys. I mean, we've got the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, medical, industrial complex. We have the military industrial complex. At the top of it all sits the banking cartel, the ultimate illusion that man has ever produced. and they all work towards the same ends, which is to suppress and disempower and make us slaves.
And they're cutting out our natural wild food supply. I still don't understand. COVID closed down. You would have thought that the most important thing would have been the gardening shops, the seed shops, the veggie shops, that we could all get good quality, healthy food and get our gardens going. But no, they were all closed down.
That's empowerment and independence.
They're all closed down. Or you could perhaps go hunting and fishing. But no, they were closed down as well. Not only were they closed down, but now Doc is back out planning to poison more of our great outdoors and more of the natural food supply, and the ways that communities can catch possums and earn some money from that. It's all so back to front, inside out, upside down.
And and this came up the other day on a Saturday when we spoke, but we can't blame people. I mean, they listen to what we're saying here, but they have never been able to find square one in all of this if they've only listened to the corporate mass media, which is 100% propaganda. So it seems logical to us. It seems like, well, can't you see? I mean, basic principle like follow the money, or can't you see the inconsistencies and contradictions and figure some of these things out? But you can't. Not if you didn't grow up with anyone who questioned, no teacher who questioned. If all you ever looked at was the official narrative of the corporate mass media and the soap opera of the state, which they produce in tandem. So it all seems outrageous what we're saying, and I understand that.
It seems outrageous, even when you have looked into it. It seems outrageous to me. My brain doesn't want to accept that there would be people who would be doing this to humanity. Every day I wake up and say, have I got this wrong? Is there another explanation? Is there another way of looking at this?
It's mythological. There is great evil afoot. It is. I mean, you can make the most mythological statements about what's going on now. It's because it is at that level. It is evil. It is so disconnected from humanity. I mean, these people, we have to understand, they have so much, they could never spend the money they have. Yeah. So what gives them their kicks? Control and power. They just want to control everything and have power over everything. It is mainlining on power makes heroin look like a chocolate addiction.
Well, I look at it like they've played too many video games as kids, and they just want to pull all the strings and press the buttons and do all that because they've grown up doing that. And that's normal for them. It's not normal for us, but it's normal. It's become normal in that culture. Yeah. And it's really scary culture.
And it's arrogant. I mean, they're disconnected from nature. They're disconnected from the common person. It's all about, it's a total disconnect. And it's all, the arrogance is jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
To the point now, if we want to talk about what this might really be happening, the most nefarious part of what might be happening is that this is depopulation.
Well, whether it's their intent, which I suspect it is, but the consequence of what they're doing clearly is depopulation.
Absolutely.
I mean, giving people contaminants in their body, giving them, isolating them from their connection, from their family, the mental health issues, all of the health concerns we've been having from the way we've been treated. And I don't think we've seen half the consequences yet because people still don't know what's happening with their incomes and their futures.
Total disempowerment, economic disempowerment now.
And it means that everything you thought that you knew is all up for change. Nobody can plan anything ahead because you really don't know what strings are going to be pulled and what buttons are going to be pressed from somewhere else. It's a huge amount of uncertainty. The best we can do, we can plant veggies in our garden and hope that at least we can stay home and eat. But that's a pretty basic desire compared to
not
people's
allowed.
Hopes and aspirations from
not allowed.
Only just back a couple of months ago when we were talking about different things, and the things that we were talking about, say at the start of March, and the concerns that we had then, we didn't even envisage a lot of these things that have been happening now.
Not this fast.
Nothing like this.
This is a blitzkrieg in the total sense of the word, pre-planned with minute military precision for decades by think tanks, and when the time was right, when the media was totally compromised, and when most governments have been totally compromised, that was the time to launch it. And that's what they've done. And it is at a blinding pace what's happening globally right now, orchestrated to the most minute psychological detail.
And playing on the psychological details. They know how to manipulate
That's what it's all
people.
about.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
I mean, what can you do? You know, my thing, starting point, turn off the media. Turn it off. Let your own brain think. Go for a walk on the beach and look at nature and connect with your friends and turn off all that bombardment of
Let your
the
spirit
story.
breathe.
Exactly.
I mean, a respiratory disease is a perfect ironic symbol for what they're doing. You know, your spirit can no longer function.
Yeah. And how can your spirit function when you're being told? You know, people are ringing me all the time saying, look, how do we set up our own off-grid lifestyle? We're out of here. We don't want this anymore. We want to go and live up in the hills. We want a little small house somewhere, our own power supply, our own running water. We're out of here. And it's almost like the only way we're going to be able to survive is going back to the forest like animals.
Well, I don't think that's going to work. What they're doing, I mean, 53,000 satellites bombarding every last centimeter of the planet with EMFs. Whatever independent, sovereign thing anyone will try, if this is allowed to go ahead, will be stopped, and it will be verboten. It's as simple as that. And they're not going to be so crass as to come with a syringe at gunpoint and give you a vaccine. No, they will make every aspect of your life contingent on compliance.
You can't go to school, you can't go on the bus, you can't go on an airplane, you can't go to hospital, you can't go to work.
Can't go from here to Westport.
Roadblock. Have you got your vaccine certificate? I mean, just coming back on the ferry from the North Island, I wasn't driving the car. I was a passenger in the car. I was told I could not go on the ferry unless I had my driver's license or some photo ID. So, well, hang on, where's the law? When did this law come into place?
Das Dokumenten bitte.
Unbelievable. In the end, a nice young chap who turned out to be a law student, and we had a pleasant conversation because he said, I think you're right. Why are they asking for this? This is crazy. But my boss said we need it. I said, well, go and ask him, why we need it, where the law is. In the end, I showed him my business card. But it's like, why do we need it? Why can't we travel around New Zealand? Why do we have to sign to go into shops? I'm hearing that Jacinda Ardern's name is appearing on numerous shop lists around the country because it's become a joke. Well, Mickey Mouse, when we trekked in the Himalayas decades ago and you had to sign in every sort of half a day. Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse. It's just...
I think we should sign those tracing documents with the name of every dictator that ever existed in history.
Adolf Hitler, Stalin.
Goebbels, the whole lot of them. I mean, and your pension and your benefits and your ability to go to school. And basically it'll come down to you will not be able to buy anything. There will be no transaction that you could do unless you comply.
But who is choosing this for us? Because I have a real problem with this. I studied law because I thought that we had a democracy and a system and ways of making things better. And what we were taught at law school, there are all these checks and balances on the abuse of power to make sure that everything sort of stays in a nice balance. And you learn, in New Zealand we don't have a written constitution, but trust the system. We can elect our representatives every 3 years, and we've got all these bureaucrats that are acting in the public interest, and we've got a judiciary who are independent. But what it turns out is they're all interrelated, and we've got the same people choosing and influencing and manipulating all of them. They're all coming from the same funding source. Got Crown Law sitting in the middle, choosing people and giving secret legal advice and telling us what they can and can't disclose. We've got the Attorney General saying, oh no, I can't disclose the legal advice. Well, why not? It's his technically his legal advice, he can choose to disclose that legal advice so we can all understand why the government's been doing what they're doing. And that's written into the parliamentary systems. But they're not going to do any of that unless we push them to do it.
Yeah, it's a fungus. There's a fungus among us, and it's got its filaments everywhere now. And we can talk all we want about democracy. I mean, the U.S. has a magnificent Constitution, Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights. It's all out the window. It's all been bought and paid for now. It doesn't matter what system you have. Eternal vigilance of the people is all that matters, because we can talk all we want about, like I see things on the internet now about how to refuse a vaccine. Well, I'm sorry, but might makes right in the most practical sense when it comes down to it, when all of the civilized things have been taken down, might makes right.
Yeah.
And we must not get to that point.
Well, we're getting close to that point. I mean, I think this is why we're seeing communities getting together. I'm getting so many calls and messages from people saying, what do we do? Help us. We need to know what we can do. We don't like this, what's happening. And individually, there's not much anybody can do.
Not individually, no.
But together there's a huge amount we can do. If only to restore your spirit, that other people care and you're not the only one that's sort of having these really bad vibes about what's going on. But together we can do a lot. You know, together, what if we boycott certain organisations? What if we unite to do whatever we need to do to make a stand against things?
It has to, yeah.
But we have to, and we have to do it really, really quickly. We're looking at these walk, chalk and talk protests, which turned out to be really good because you can write your messages on the chalk and they stay there for some time. So even if different groups miss each other, people going, oh gosh, I never thought about that. So
and by the way, spray them down with water, anyone listening around the country, because that turns it into a paint-like substance that lasts a lot longer.
Right. Yeah, so, uniting is great. Let's have a bit of fun, because we're not going to let the fun and the spirit being taken out of our lives. So at the very least, coming together and talking and sharing
empowering.
ideas, and it is empowering.
It has to be, as you say, very fast. It has to be a groundswell of nonviolent, non-cooperation with all of this nonsense.
And question everything. Make them explain. What law are you relying on? When did that law come into force? Why am I being asked to do this week when I wasn't asked to do it last week? Even with this new horrendous law, that the COVID health response law that came through last week so quickly, it has still got limits, because every law must be interpreted according to its purpose. So if the purpose of that law is, they include it, proportionality, it must be interpreted in a proportional way. They can't just say, oh look, there's this little law that lets us do certain things. No, it must be proportional. So all actions must be lawful, they must be reasonable, they must be done for a proper purpose, they must be take into account all relevant considerations, they can't take into account any irrelevant considerations, and they must be done properly procedurally, so procedurally fairness. So for example, people were worried about the Search and Surveillance Act and saying, oh, we already lost our rights under the Search and Surveillance Act. Yes, there is a Search and Surveillance Act. However, we tested that earlier this year with a warrantless search for alleged drug offences, and the district court threw out the police prosecution because they didn't follow the law. Now, the policeman who gave evidence, he'd been a policeman, I think he said 34 years. 34 years, he'd never got a oral search warrant because he hadn't needed to, because he just went and did what he was going to do. They didn't even know who the judges and JPs were available that day, because they knew they wouldn't go and need them, because they never do. They just go and bowl into people's house and say, hey, we're the police, we're coming in. That is not what the law says. And thank you to my client who said, let's test this. And we tested it, and the judge threw out the case because the police hadn't followed the law. It's not enough that they suspect drugs. They also have to have reasonable grounds to believe that evidence will be destroyed if they don't enter immediately. So if nobody's home, how can the police have reasonable grounds to believe that evidence is going to be destroyed? As soon as they realise nobody's home, they have to go. and they have to get a search warrant. So these are the type of things we need to pull the threads together of what we have still got left, and we need to share that information, and we need to empower each other to have the courage to stand up and question these things, because if we don't, if we just let them do what they want, we basically lose everything we've got. They will just, it's like a tank rolling down the street, just squashing everything in its way.
That's right. Yeah, and to talk about further about law enforcement, I mean, Rashid Buttar has appealed to law enforcement and the military in the States, both retired and active. And the point is that things are happening so quickly and so urgently that we need to decide where we stand right now to avoid so much anguish and suffering and grief. The faster everyone decides where they stand on this issue, including law enforcement, the better it will be for everybody and the quicker this can turn around. Now, what Rashid Buttar said in essence is that when you take off your uniform, you are just one of the people. You and your spouse and your family, you are just one of the people. And believe me, when your usefulness is over, you will be as expendable as everyone else.
Yeah, and the poisons in your food and the 5G in your environment harm you too. We're all human. We all suffer from the consequences of these things. We all need to be on the same team. You know, that's the way I see it. The people should all be on the same team. It's the corporations who are our enemy. You know, the people need to find ways of working together. It's not us and them. We're us.
Yeah, I mean, a corporation is not a person anyway. I mean, we don't have to have any consideration for a fictitious entity that has become a cancer on our planet. But to law enforcement, decide now whether you stand with the people of which you are actually a part, or whether you stand with the people who might be telling you to do illegal things coming up soon.
I haven't looked at the police oath, but I just looked yesterday at the oath that MPs swear when they go into Parliament and compared it with the oath that the judiciary swear. And it's quite interesting. The MP's oath, so they go through this whole electoral campaign saying we're going to do this for you and we're going to do that for you. The day they get to Parliament, they swear an oath of allegiance to the Crown. Now, there are ways to interpret that to make what they said honest, and the way
is Corona, the Crown.
Yeah, the irony. The way to make them honest is yes, but that means that they actually owe fiduciary duties to us because they're representing us. So even though they are working for the Crown, you must assume into all that they're doing it on behalf of us, because otherwise everything they say is a lie. Interestingly, with the judges, they have a duty to the Crown, but they also have a duty to do good by all people. So it's quite interesting. The judges actually have got some more direct obligation to the people than the elected representatives. Now, I ask, how could that have happened when the Constitution was amended, I think, in 1986, and the Oaths Act, I haven't checked the date, I presume that's all come from the same time. But how could that have happened? Who let that slip through the system? And I think it was Geoffrey Palmer was the Prime Minister at the time, or he was certainly the Attorney General at the time. So the people that have actually got some pretty good constitutional knowledge, how did they let these things slip through our system? Because if we don't have elected representatives who represent us, what are we even bothering voting for them for?
No, I mean, it's the same everywhere. I mean, it's arrogance. They think they really forget who pays them, the position of utmost trust and responsibility that the people have placed in them, and they think they have a mandate to just do what they please, and it's sheer arrogance, but it's power corrupting. I mean, they don't realize how low down the totem pole they are, but they feel this power, and it corrupts them every bit as much as the people at the top.
Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, and we are getting pretty close to that. We've only got, we've only got the people's voice left, and the people's voice has been suppressed, and it's gotten very quiet. It needs to be a lot louder, and a lot sooner that it needs to be louder, because they're still grinding down one path, and unless we can come together really quickly, we're just going to be backed right into a corner with nowhere to go at all.
No, I mean, we are magnificent, spiritual, eternal beings. Are we going to cower trembling in front of microbes? I mean, no, we're bigger than that. Are we going to let our rights and freedoms be stolen from us so easily, and so that our progeny has to win them back with blood and tears in the future? We're better than that.
The land of climbing Mount Everest and round the world yacht races and bungee jumping. People come to New Zealand for adventure sport, and now we're afraid of a little hypothetical virus.
And are we going to be fooled? Are we going to take on board the propaganda from these abominable institutions of corporate mass media and believe it? We're brighter than that too, aren't we?
I'd hope so. I hope so.
We need to be bigger, better, and brighter than we're showing so far.
I think we need a vision of what we do want as well, because if we don't have a vision of what we do want, it's very easy for things to be serially taken away step by step by step. And then we realise one day we wake up and we're locked in our home. We can't go out. We're not allowed to go out just out the window anymore. We can barely go out in our own gardens. Hang on, how did that happen? Well, it happened, and it's been happening, and it's going to keep happening until we say, no, we're not taking this.
Yeah. And certain things have been happening over decades incrementally, but this is going so fast. That's what's scary. And they know they're walking a knife edge. Every new thing that they do, the government passes a law like that, absolute tyranny, in 48 hours, it exposes the reality of who they are and who they're working for. Every new thing they do exposes them further. So as they take power, they're also exposing themselves and walking a knife edge, because if people wake up fast enough, they will fall right through that.
Or maybe the people that are passing these laws can wake up. I mean, at the moment, we've seen a few voices in Parliament saying, questioning what's being done. We haven't seen many.
There's always a few.
There's always a few. But what if the others said, gosh, good point. Hang on a minute. What the heck is going on here? I'm not going along with this anymore. I'm going to stand up. I've been representing the people. I've been voted to represent the people. I'm not actually going along with that game anymore. Whose game is it anyway? And demand. What if every Labour Party Member of Parliament said to their cabinet representative, to the ministers, why are you doing this? We're not with you anymore. The Maori caucus, why are they going along and having their own Maori rights on the marae undermined? And why are any of them going along having people's rights to their freedoms of choice and democracy undermined?
It's astonishing.
The buck stops with every single one of them individually. And hey, they might be worried about their own career prospects. Well, they've got much more to worry about if they don't stand up.
They have no idea. It's astonishing that our parliament has a hierarchy. So the ministers and the prime minister are in their own club, and they go off and meet with the other top echelon clubs around the world and then impose their rubbish on your regular MP.
Yeah. So the MP is actually potentially a game changer if they stand up and ask questions. Not just the opposition. I'm talking about the ones in government too. I mean, we used to have confidence in the Greens to do the right thing for the people of New Zealand, but they've been pretty much silent on this.
Yeah, well, the party structure is to blame for so much of the disempowerment of supposed representatives of constituencies.
Yeah, it's an excuse. But it's not a good excuse.
No, of course not.
I mean, they're individually representing us. They can say no.
And especially here, where it doesn't take you millions of dollars to get elected, you actually don't need the damn party.
You don't need the party. Just stand up and say, hey, we don't want this anymore. We don't want to turn around, and we want people power. We actually want a government that represents the people. I mean, it's been a bit of a thing that I've got into with the Outdoors Party, and it is through a party simply because it's easier to coordinate and do things with a group of people. But if you've got a party whose objective is the wisdom of the crowd, let's represent the people. We don't have a obligation to some international organisation to do what they want. And if any of the other parties have actually got an agreement like that to an international organisation, why? How can they possibly justify owing any allegiance to any international organisation when they're voted to represent the people here? You know, all of these rotten layers of the onion are going to have to come clean, and they're going to have to step forward, and they're going to have to tell us why they've been doing what they're doing, and why they haven't been representing the people they're elected for.
I mean, a party is analogous to a corporation. It's an artificial hierarchy that has now usurped the purpose. So within corporations, there's people as well. They're interested in making money, but they're actual people that are the shareholders and the people that run the corporation. And it's the same with a party. When a party tastes power, and main aim of a party then becomes to retain and increase that power, then it's dehumanized. So all these corporate structures dehumanize the ones that are involved in them.
Yeah. Well, there's actually, interestingly, in New Zealand, I only found this out recently, that you can be an incorporated political party, or you can be an unincorporated political party.
Oh, yeah.
So like the Outdoors Party, we're an unincorporated political party. So it's just an aggregation of the people. That's the members, and that's what we are. But the incorporated political parties like National and Labour, they can then, as a separate entity, like a corporate entity, enter agreements with other parties. And that's when they forget, they, on the one hand, saying that they represent the people, but actually they're not representing the people. So it's all complicated, and it's, again, layers and layers and layers to unravel.
Yeah, of obfuscation and all kinds of possibilities. But in reading the this public health legislation, this awful thing that was just passed, it's my understanding that when you say that there are some things in there which can be interpreted to our benefit, but what's your understanding of the Section 11 orders?
Okay, so the government now, I think it's the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health, can make orders under Section 11 to do certain things. But the order is delegated legislation. It's not an act of Parliament. So an order that is contrary to fundamental rights and freedoms should not be upheld by the courts. So whether it actually is upheld by the courts or not remains to be tested. But if it's fundamental that delegated legislation must comply with fundamental rights and freedoms, and it must comply with the purpose of the Act. So the purpose of the Act, that goes back to this proportionality, and the purpose is to control the virus. So if there's an order that's passed, and there has been an order, it's a long order and I haven't got every word clear in my head yet, but if an order's been passed that goes beyond what is necessary for a proportional response to the virus, it is an unlawful order that can be challenged. And our court should step up and say, no, we do not accept that order is lawful.
Should step up.
Should step up. And, you know, this is the problem, because it's been a problem in a long time with the judiciary in New Zealand. They're basically chosen by the same people that run the rest of our system. There's no independence. And Geoffrey Palmer and others have been talking about it for a long time. Justice Hammond, I think, who died fairly recently, he wrote quite a few books about that. You know, we need independent judiciary with a whole separate body appointing our judges so they don't feel beholden to the Attorney General and to the Crown, because how can they independently rule on laws when their next career move is dependent on the same people that they're ruling against? It's just a huge flawed system. But, you know, I've found, especially the district court judges are generally pretty decent people who are there because they do believe in humanity. And if you give them some good information, I've done particularly with medicinal cannabis cases. I had a lovely judge in Taupo the other day, and my client, the judge gave him a discharge without conviction for medicinal cannabis use, and then my client said, I want to speak to the judge, and I'm sort of like, gosh, what's he going to say? But he told a lovely story about his mother and how she died peacefully with cannabis. And the judge returned to him speaking in Maori and just gave a beautiful response and explaining how difficult it is for the judges when our laws are encouraging pharmaceutical drugs and they're not encouraging natural remedies, and the judge is in a huge dilemma. So there are judges like that who really do have humanity at heart.
Sure.
And when people can stand up in court and tell their story and the judges can respond, I think it gives us a lot more trust in the system. You know, that for me was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had in the New Zealand courts. So, but it's only by getting in a position that you do tell the story and you do appeal to the judge's humanity that we encourage that humanity to blossom, and to override the bad stuff that we're seeing. So again, it's the people standing that's so important, the people speaking and sharing the stories, because if you see someone out on the street doing something, it's very easy for the system to blacklist them and blame them and everything. But when you understand their story and their story comes forward and it's explained, then everything can change. And I think, you know, we've been given this one story by the propaganda, the spin story, and we haven't been hearing the people's stories.
No.
And that's another really important thing with walking, talking and chalking. You know, I'm just thinking, I'm going to be in Christchurch next weekend and doing a tour around the country. I think we need to hear as many people's stories as possible. Let's get those stories out there. Let's record those stories and share those stories. And that is what rebuilds humanity.
Absolutely. And the next time we do talks here in Nelson, I think a lot of people should be encouraged to speak for a while. And
Definitely.
because there'll be more and more
people coming,
stories.
and different stories from different backgrounds, and it's just all of it's the coming together, the jigsaw puzzle of the whole that makes everything so interesting, the rich tapestry of life, the wisdom of the crowd, whatever you call it.
Which is what they're clumsily trying to avoid,
to suppress.
with it was separating people and suppressing speech, and it's they're so obvious. I mean, well, as we said, and it's not obvious to everyone, obviously.
I think once you've cracked the code of what's going on, it's obvious. When you're trying to understand what's going on, nothing makes sense.
No, if you come from a premise that that these forces at the top are actually beneficent, if you come from that premise, nothing can possibly make sense.
But when you understand that they've got their own agenda and it's not what's good for us, then everything makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's very few genuinely evil people in the world, but they have risen to the top of power structures, which makes them so highly dangerous, but they know how few they are, and they're scared to death. If we talk about fear from this pandemic, the accumulated fear of the populations of the earth is nothing compared to the fear of these people. They are so afraid they're going to lose this final battle. Yeah,
and that's for me, the humanity and the courage. It's the courage. If we all get courage, it's scary for all of us. Every time I speak out publicly, it's scary and I'm a nervous wreck beforehand. But I do it because the courage is so important. If you find your own courage and you find your own voice, you can do so much more. And you get better at it, and it's not as scary next time, and your world grows. Instead of, you're not sitting in your own fear, you're sitting in a whole world of possibility.
And even if you're attacked, you're still speaking for those people who cannot yet see what's happening. You're still of service to them.
And raising awareness. And you never know what it's going to be, that little point that does connect with them. And then they go, oh yeah, now I get it.
Yeah. But to paraphrase that famous quote from Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, ours is not to ask why this is happening to us in this lifetime, but just what will I do with the time given to us? And I would advise that Tolkien fans who have only seen the movies of The Lord of the Rings, get the book out and read a chapter which was, I think, quite intentionally left out of the movies, called The Scouring of the Shire. This was a chapter of empowerment, where the hobbits in the Shire were so under the thumb of Sharky's men. Sharky was Saruman. He was just another name for Saruman. He had a bunch of thugs running the Shire and creating all these rules and suppression of everybody. And the few hobbits who had been in the wars come back home and just laughed at these thugs and empowered everybody. Brilliant. And they routed them and liberated the Shire in 2 days flat.
Yeah, it's all it takes. If everybody said, hey, we've had enough, We're going to stand.
That's what are they going to do if everybody walks down the street arm in arm and walks into the shops and refuses to sign the tracing papers? It's just, what are they going to do about that?
Or just go in the shops where they don't care about the tracing papers and abandon the shops where they make you sign.
Exactly. I tell them what shop owners need to understand about these track and trace papers is that if anybody that week tests positive with the bogus test, then everybody on that list will be quarantined and your shop will be closed and your business will likely, that'll be the final nail in the coffin, because you and everybody that works there will also be quarantined.
Yeah, for a month or whatever it is.
And your risk of using those papers and not resisting them is even greater than the individuals who sign it.
And it might just be because somebody came into your shop who had a flu vaccine and that triggered off a positive test.
Sure,
and just because of that, everybody's a contact.
And if they have their way, we will have no economic power left. Every small and medium-sized business will be in the worst case scenario, we'll be in bread and soup lines. And if we don't comply, then we just starve.
And that's what we also need to do with supporting our local communities and our local businesses, not the multinational businesses. They did fine during the close down.
They're having a bonanza.
Our money. The telcos, the powercos, and the grocery supermarkets, they got all of the cash flow. And the banks, they all just carried on operating. But who missed out? All of the small family businesses, the veggie shops, the creative people, the arts people, all the little local people. So let's just say, okay, well, you guys, you big guys, you've had all your turn. Now we just will banish you for a couple of months and we'll give all our money back to the little guys who are our community.
Yeah. And the other main thing they will imminently do, it could happen very quickly, as we see with shops not accepting cash, which is illegal actually, because you cannot discriminate on the basis of legal tender. But they are dead set on eliminating cash, in which case they will have total control of all transactions and no anonymity and no privacy whatsoever left.
And they can just turn it off if their system crashes and nobody's got anything. And we've seen it with smart meters where there's no apparent explanation for how these power bills are massive, because it's all electronic. And how do you prove it?
Yeah, and
everything's just gone. Everything's just gone. It's not real.
Yeah.
It's all illusory.
Yeah, and this whole thing, of course, for tyranny, it's a perfect excuse for getting rid of dissenters. You can get rid of a dissenter by taking them away for quarantine. And also any dissenter can have their cashless society number canceled so that they cannot do anything anymore.
Yeah.
Total control.
Yeah. Well, the more this can be talked about and exposed and questioned and challenged, and the more the community can say, no, that is not the kind of future we want. And urgent now, like this week, this weekend, next week, every day. Talk about it.
Urgent.
Urgent.
I have faith in New Zealand that we could be the first to resist and say no to all of this if a critical mass does see what's actually happening. I really have faith. Other countries could be way more difficult than New Zealand, but I really think that we have a chance here to once again model sanity in this world.
I do too. I get a strong impression that the Prime Minister's playing up to her world leaders for her own career options internationally. But she does represent us. There's only 4 or 5 million of us. She has next door neighbours, and her ministers have next door neighbours and family and friends. If everybody says to her, no, that is not okay, we are not doing that, she has to come back and come back and remember who she's there for.
Exactly. I mean, she's not a Dick Cheney. She's galaxies away from a Dick Cheney. She's a real human being, and she really has to be woken up to what she is being party to here.
I think so too. So important. And New Zealand can be the model of what we want. We have to make it. And if we inspire other countries to make a stand as well, fantastic. But whether we do or we don't, we get choices about our country. And we've got to act really quickly. We've got an election so far scheduled in September, only a few months away, but we can't let things keep deteriorating at the rate that they've been deteriorating up to September, or we'll have nothing left to stand for.
Exactly. An election will be a total farce. I mean, taking an oath to the Queen, they might as well take a pledge of allegiance to the Five Eyes at the same time, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know.
That's probably good for now.
Yeah, so anyway, it's time for us all to decide on which side we stand, the side of tyranny, the side of human rights violations and crimes against humanity, or to quickly decide to step on the other side and put an end to this insanity.
Which side of history do you want to be on? We are choosing.
Exactly.
Choose courage and humanity.
Over this blink of an eye illusion of a lifetime that we think is so precious. It will be precious if you do the right thing right now.
We've still got a lot of beauty in this world and a lot of amazing, great things to live for. But we've got to look after them, value them, stand up for them.
Yep. Anyway, nice talking to you again.
You too, Joe. Always good.
Orwell, tell me, Mr. Orwell, tell me how it feels if you can see us now that we are standing in the thick of all the things you tried so hard to warn us about back when we had a chance. Orwell, did 1984 tell how we could avoid giving our power away so thoughtlessly? Orwell, how is it that we fell under such a deep spell? We now wake in a tale called People Farm. Orwell, do you think it's really farewell? Might there be a sequel where the broadcast lie cease to hypnotize us to buy a life without sense, life with no heart? Orwell, tell me, what do we do now? How do we break the silence of fear? What if we were to say, just stop right there? Have we had enough? How much can we bear? What will it take to rise, awake, aware? We have always held every power, casting every seed for all we reap. Everything we see, our creation, no time now to deny and go to sleep. Balanced on the edge of a planet, the lemmings and the eagles must stand and choose their way. Now is the age. What'll it be? We choose who we are, and that's what we'll see. It's not science fiction, it's a straight prediction, turning all to real. You foresaw Big Brother, but did you know his mother? Commerce is her name. Her puppets take the blame. Love and life itself, priced and on the shelf. Long departed Orwell, free of space and time, have you a clue